Alright, let's bring this thing in for landing. It's already gone more segments than I anticipated because I had a lot to say. Gosh darn. Alright, so I left you with Apollo 11 safely landing on the moon and getting the astronauts safely back to Earth. Okay, so if I forgot to say this, the first man on the moon is Neil Armstrong. 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 Okay, Buzz Aldrin's the second. All right. And that's in July of 1969. So they've made Kennedy's goal with like half a year to spare. Yeah. But they're not done yet. Now we've got the hardware. We've successfully pulled off a first landing. We'll do some more. So the next trip to the moon is Apollo 12. Not nearly as exciting as Apollo 11, which was the first, right? But the astronauts will basically repeat the mission. Now they do one thing. Apollo 11, the goal was to just get to the moon. Now they had a landing site in mind, but there were some navigational issues. This is all very new, right? So for Apollo 12, they try to prove they can land where they intended to. And so they pick a site that NASA had sent some unmanned probes to the moon earlier to do some preliminary reconnaissance before we tried to send men. There was a series of them. There was the Ranger, there was a lunar orbiter, there was a ship called the Surveyor, which actually would make a landing on the moon. Now it wouldn't return. It was just a robot. Okay. They launched several of these things. Some didn't make it, some did. Right? And so for Apollo 12, they decided, well, we'll try to land near the area where Surveyor had landed. Okay? And doggone, the astronauts actually managed to pull this off. Here in the background is the lunar lander that the astronauts have come in on. Looky here. It's the Surveyor unmanned spacecraft. Right? They have landed within just a few hundred yards of the unmanned spacecraft that have been on the moon for a couple of years. Okay? So this shows that we are capable of doing landing where we want to go. And so these first couple of flights, there's a lot of it is just making sure the equipment works, we can get where we want to go, this kind of thing. So with Apollo 13, they're starting to look more towards actual science. Okay, so they put some scientific experiments out on 11 and some out on 12, and they picked up some rocks, of course. But the main thing was still, can we get to the moon without dying? Okay, so it looks like we've got this thing kind of under control, and so they'll start turning more towards also trying to get what kind of science can we accomplish while we're on the moon. Okay? So some was done on 11 and 12. By 13, they're really starting to shift to it. Okay. Which leads us to this Latin slogan on the Apollo 13 flight patch. Ex Luna Scientia. I might be mispronouncing that. I don't speak Latin, but from the moon, science. So the Apollo 13 astronauts have been trained, had more geology training than the earlier guys. They've had some more sophisticated equipment to work with. Well, something goes terribly wrong on the way to the moon in April of 1970. Okay. One of the oxygen tanks in the spacecraft explodes. Now, the spacecraft runs off of a device called a fuel cell. Okay? The fuel cell mixes hydrogen and oxygen together to create electricity. A byproduct is drinkable water. Okay? So when the oxygen tank blows up, you basically lose your breathing air, your electrical generating capability, and your water that's used to drink and cool a spacecraft. This is really bad news. Okay? Now, fortunately, the Apollo 13 crew has an entire extra spacecraft. They have the lunar lander, okay? Because this fortunately happens before they had landed on the moon. So when the main ship is disabled, they're able to take shelter in the lunar module and stay alive long enough to return to Earth, reactivate the command module, and land safely. So the lunar landing is a bust, but we did get the crew back. Okay? So a lot of people consider this one of NASA's finest hours. Obviously, landing men on the moon is a big accomplishment. Okay, but getting these men back was also a very exciting, very dangerous time but it was also a big sense of accomplishment. Now, there's a movie about this. It's called Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks. Now, the movie is kind of Hollywooded a bit. I mean, they're trying to tell a several-day story in the space of 2 hours, so it's condensed. There's some dialogue that never really happened. But all in all, the movie is really true to the spirit of the flight. So if you've never seen that movie, you might look for that. So once again, the Apollo program has to have a halt while they figure out what went wrong. It doesn't help that the part of the ship that blew up is out in outer space and is burned up upon re-entry. But they have to go back and look at telemetry and things. If they think they figured out what happened, and they'll take steps to fix that in the next ship. So there's a long pause before Apollo 14 is launched, which isn't launched for I don't know, maybe 1971, late 1970, early 1971, I forget. Okay, so Apollo 14 does successfully land on the moon, and this is the end of the initial lunar expeditions. Okay, so there's going to be 3 left. Okay, now NASA had originally had enough ships. They had originally planned out to Apollo 20. 20 was canceled for budget cuts. They had 18 and 19 penciled in. There was concern after Apollo 13. People were going, we pushed our luck. NASA's budget's getting cut because people are like, well, we've already been to the moon, man. We picked up some rocks. Why do we need to go again? And eventually 18 and 19 are canceled. Okay. But there's 3 missions left that what they call the J missions, which are the very heavy science-oriented missions. Okay, as we've improved the ships and we've learned what we can do, and we found ways to light stuff and build new things. So there's 3 of these missions. So Apollo 14 successfully landed on the moon. But the last 3 missions are 15, 16, and 17. Okay, and I'm just going to lump these all together because they're very, very similar, and I don't want this thing to go on, forever. Okay, but these J missions are very heavily geared towards science. The astronauts have improved gear; they can stay on the moon much longer. They can stay for like 2-3 days instead of just like several hours. They have a little car they take with them, a lunar rover that allows them to go further out from the lander. I got some pictures here. Yeah, here's the lunar rover. Okay, and this is where they actually, I mean, we'd had TV for Apollo 11, but by now the TV's getting pretty good. There's actually a camera on the lunar rover, and you can watch these guys walk around on the surface of the moon and talk to each other. It's really, really cool. So I won't, bore you. I mean, so there's 15, there's 16, there's 17. They drive a little car around. They pick up rocks. On Apollo 17, they actually send a geologist to the moon. Everybody else had been a test pilot. By now, they figure they've got the actual landing figured out, so they send a scientist. And that's the end of the Apollo program. Oh, here is one of the late model Apollos. You can see up at the top there all that equipment. They actually would blow a panel off the ship, and there's all kinds of scientific cameras and stuff. So while the 2 guys are walking around on the moon, the command module pilot, the 3rd astronaut's orbiting the moon, taking pictures, running experiments. So the last 3 missions are very science heavy, as much as they can cram in with what they've got. And the last moon landing is Apollo 17 in December 72. So they started in July of 69, continued through December 72. So the last man on the moon is a guy named Eugene Cernan, C-E-R-N-A-N. This is his picture next to a flag, and someone's thoughtfully, well, it's the other astronaut, made sure to have Earth in the background. And that's the end of the moon landing program. Okay? Now from there's still a few things going on. So although the moon landing has ended, we have developed for Apollo all this new technology, spacecraft and launch vehicles and support. And so there was a side program called the Apollo Applications Program, which was designed to apply the Apollo technology towards other things. And what they want to do is launch a space station. The space station is known as Skylab. Okay? It's basically built using Apollo technology. Okay? Now, turns out there's a problem. Now, this is an interesting program. They have a telescope array where they can study the sun and other planets. Okay? And then they have all kinds of scientific experiments inside, and they have these solar cells that will produce electricity. Okay? But there's a problem. Okay? When they launched the Skylab, there's been a design flaw, and one entire there's supposed to be another solar panel sticking out this side. Okay? And the solar panel's ripped off during launch. Okay? And then this solar panel is stuck. It doesn't extend. So now the ship is missing its two primary solar panels, aren't working. One's gone completely and one's locked in, leaving only these four up here to look like a windmill. Okay? This kind of severely restricts the electrical power available to the ship. Okay? Another thing that happened was there was a thermal shield that was on the side that was ripped off during the launch. So the Skylab is in orbit and it's crippled. So they launched the Skylab on a Saturn V. The manned crew isn't supposed to launch in an Apollo spacecraft and catch up with the Skylab and dock with it. Instead, now the Skylab has been largely disabled. So there's a pause. NASA has to come up with all these fixes. They were able to do several things. Okay? They developed this parasail, looks like a umbrella, okay, that could be stuck out of an airlock and extended to shield the side of the ship from solar rays because it was getting very hot inside of the ship. And the astronauts are able to extend the second panel, okay, and restore the electrical power. And so Skylab's working a little bit less power than they originally intended, but they have enough to do the experiments. And we'll fly 3 flights to the Skylab. Okay? The final flight stays for 84 days. So this is like a very primitive space station. This is an outgrowth of Apollo. But we only have the one Skylab. Now, there was another one, but that they could have launched, but there was a backup. Budget cuts and people losing interest, so that basically more or less effectively ends it, you would think. But there's one last little hurrah for the Apollo spacecraft. That's the Apollo-Soyuz test project. Now, the Soviets have a spaceship called the Soyuz. Now, when I talked about Nixon, I told you that Nixon was working on détente, about getting better relations with the Soviet Union. Okay? And one of the things we decided to do was launch a joint mission with the Soviets. Okay? We have a leftover Apollo spaceship from the moon landing program, and so we developed a docking mechanism that allows our ship and the Soviet ship to meet up and dock in orbit. This is flown in July of '75. This is basically a political thing. I mean, they did some experiments, okay, but it was more just an exercise in trying to cooperate between the two space powers. And this will be the last flight of an Apollo spacecraft. So I added this into this lecture at the end because basically the whole space race starts off as a competition between the Soviet Union and the United States, okay, which triggers the whole Apollo program. And the last Apollo flight is a joint mission with the Soviets, the Russians. Okay, so it kind of neatly wraps up the space race with a little bit of cooperation at the end. Now I'm almost out of time here, but the next thing with the end of the Apollos, you get the space shuttle. The space shuttle is supposed to fly in the '70s. It's a radical new design. No one's ever built anything like it. There's delays. They don't successfully launch the space shuttle until April 1981. So there's like this 6-year gap between the Apollo-Soyuz test project and the space shuttle. And the space shuttle is really exciting. It's really neat. But here's the deal if you're a space geek. The space shuttle can carry up to 7 astronauts. Okay? It flies like about 126 missions, I think. Okay? And they all just go around the Earth. Now, they build the space shuttle. They launch the Hubble Space Telescope. But you're at the point now where you really just can't keep track of the flights. They just all run together. What's the difference between Shuttle Flight 29 and Shuttle Flight 32? Can you name the 7 crew members? No. What did they launch a satellite? Did they work on the Hubble? It all starts to run together. And space travel kind of becomes kind of mundane. Okay, it's still exciting, but it's not that exploratory sense that you had like we would get in your early days. I'm out of time, so we got to call it a day.